Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at my prediction for a Ron DeSantis versus Joe Biden matchup, similar to what we did in my previous video, except this time instead of Trump versus Biden, it'll be DeSantis versus Biden. This will be part of, I guess, a long project I'll be doing throughout the next year and a half, tracking my predictions for these two matchups. We'll also throw in, maybe some Mike Pence versus Kamala Harris and some other potential matchups, but I think the two most likely matchups are Biden versus Trump and Biden versus DeSantis. So that's what we'll be looking at, these coming months and this year. And we'll be seeing, in a few months from now, will I have changed my opinion? Will I, maybe now I think DeSantis is going to win. Maybe now I think Biden's going to win. Will that change? Will the political climate in the country change? We're going to have to see, and we're going to have to take a look at all the different things going into what's happening and whether or not Joe Biden will be reelected come 2024. That being said, I do have an announcement to make. I have a new Instagram. It is at Ryan Jakubowski _3. Again, that's my name, Ryan, JAKUBOWSKI _3. It's my public account. I don't really know what I'll be using it for as of right now. It'll mostly just be stuff that I do, like with politics, like writing, podcasting, whatnot. So again, if you all could go follow me there, that would be great. It's again at Ryan Jakubowski _3. Right now, I've got 160 something followers, and I'm hoping to get that up as we, continue here. So with that out of the way, let's talk about this map, right? Let's talk about this matchup. And so I think the first thing that we need to understand about this, and like there are like a few fundamental things like that will affect every state in this matchup. The first thing I want to say is that I think overall DeSantis is a stronger candidate than Trump, but not necessarily the strongest candidate. I don't think that he is someone who I look at and say, wow, that guy's a world beater, right? I think he has a lot of qualities that are good about him, but I think at the end of the day, he's not, this electoral beast that Obama was in 2008. He's not, even Trump 2016. And I think that takes away a lot of the upside that he could have potentially had, right? That being said, I think on the other side of the aisle, I do not view Joe Biden as a strong incumbent. I know a lot of people after the midterms think that he's in a really good spot. I think he's in a decent spot. I think he has a very viable path to getting reelected, but he's not a strong incumbent. Look, like he'll be 81 in 2024. He's not a charismatic person. He's not someone who I think inspires a lot of support outside of that base he has. And I think, yeah, a lot of moderates and swing voters are going to, come home for him, especially against someone like Trump. But he has a very, very shaky coalition. I think, the second that youth turnout drops, he's done. The second that DeSantis and the Republicans find a way to win back moderate voters, he's done, right? And so I think, like, Biden is a very beatable incumbent if Republicans get it together. The issue is I don't know if they can after 2022. So that's just my fundamental outlook on this election. I think DeSantis is stronger than Trump, but again, not necessarily a world beater. So that being said, let's look at our safe Biden states. Not too much change here from the Trump video. I think overall, DeSantis does a little better in the suburbs than Trump, although I don't think he gets any sort of reversion, right? Like he's not bringing back the numbers that Mitt Romney got. He's not bringing back, the numbers that a lot of Republicans got even in recent midterms. And I think that when you consider that, it makes it really hard to see how Romney could win back states like Colorado or Virginia, even though Virginia I don't think will be safe, but I think you get the point here. So those are DeSantis' safe states. Again, some of these states I do not like. Montana, Utah, I did not have as safe for Trump because I think they'd be under 15. Again, the Senate race in Utah was a 10-point race, so I think that there's a path for Democrats to make it semi-close. Montana was also, a pretty good result for Democrats in 2022, so I think it's fair to say that it could narrow up a bit under Trump, but I think DeSantis does better in those more educated western portions of the state, and I think he wins it by 15 or 16 points. That being said, I think there are more interesting things on this map to deal with than the safe states. Let's get into our likely states. Versus New Mexico, Biden won New Mexico by 10 in 2020. It's a bit of a right-trending state for sure, but DeSantis is not the guy to get the margins the Republicans need in the state, and it'll also take a while for that to even become realistic. So I think it's not going anywhere. Nebraska 2nd district, Biden won it by the redrawn district, Biden won by like 6.5, and it's a left trending seat. And Biden would do worse in the Omaha metro than against DeSantis than he would against Trump, but he still won it by 6.5 in 2020. It's still trending blue. I'd be surprised if it's really that close. Virginia too. Glenn Youngkin won by kind of getting that turnout from rural areas and getting some reversion in the suburbs, along with Democratic turnout being really bad, right? And people are saying, Youngkin's kind of like the DeSantis of Virginia. They're different, and I think that people need to understand that a governor's race does not, equate to a federal race. Like, if that was the case, I could have said that Democrats would be winning Montana, right? Or they'd be winning Kentucky or Louisiana, right? And I just don't think that those things are happening anytime soon. And so, Virginia, DeSantis would, do better than Trump, but he wouldn't come close to winning it. Maine at large, I think, as we know, kind of just the generic, like, leady state, never really a 15-point victory for Democrats, but always, in that range. For DeSantis, a few states we need to talk about here. First first district, rather, is this first district in Nebraska. I think Trump won it by like 13 or 14 in 2020. It's left trending because it is kind of suburban, and the Democrats, there was a special election back in like June of last year, and Democrats only lost it by like 5. So I think that's their ceiling. Either way, in a presidential race, it would be more polarized, and I think they'd win it. Republicans win it by 11 or 12. Kansas, Democrats, again, have made inroads here, especially in the eastern portions of the state, in the Kansas City suburbs. And that makes it harder for DeSantis to win it by, like, the 20-point margins he would have, that Mitt Romney got and whatnot. But I think at the end of the day, it's still a red state. He'll still win it by, 10, 12 points. Iowa and Ohio, like, you could, like, these states are borderline safe. But again, I don't think there could be more than 15 because, again, like, JD Vance won his Senate race by 6% this year in Ohio, and that's like the closest thing you have to a presidential race because it's federal. And I don't think DeSantis would only win by 6, but I do think that he would kind of, not do 50, not win by 15, if you get my drift. Florida, that's his home state. He won by 19. Again, there's no way he'd win it by 19 in a presidential race unless something goes like horribly wrong for Joe Biden. In Florida, at least. But I think he's really strong here. He's popular, evidently. And I'd be surprised if it's, like, really close. Like, it'll probably be, maybe half of what he won it by, whether that's 8, 10, 12 points. Either way, he'll win it by a comfortable margin. It'll officially usher in the era of Florida being non-competitive in presidential races. And then lastly, we got the second district in Maine. I think this is like one of the few districts or states in the country, whatever you want to call it, where DeSantis would actually do worse than Trump, because this seat is like very, very weird in that it likes to elect Democrats congressionally like Jared Golden by pretty good margins, but they love Trump, right? And so DeSantis, I think, is not the best fit for the area. He'll still win it by like 5 or 6, but I do think that Trump would do better here, win it by maybe a couple points more. So, and also Alaska. Alaska, again, Democrats been doing better here as of late, but it won't be until, I think, 2028 or 2032 that it really gets, within 5 points. Although I will be watching how much, DeSantis wins it by, because we'll see how left it trends. And then the remaining states, I think you can make a case for being, competitive or likely. I think Minnesota I will put in the likely D column. It's close. It could be under 5, but I think for now, like, Democrats swept it again this year. They ran the worst possible nominee for attorney general and still won statewide by but a point. And Biden is fairly popular here. Tim Walz won the governorship by 9%, against a Republican I actually don't think was that bad of a candidate. And, it's a left-trending state, and DeSantis would maybe do better in the Minneapolis suburbs than Trump would, but, they're growing. They're still blue, and I think it gives Biden about a 5-point victory in the state. So, yeah, now the rest of these states I think could be competitive to some extent. Like, some states are more competitive than others. I think the first state I want to eliminate here is New Hampshire. Biden, like, it could honestly be likely. It would not surprise me at all. The only reason I didn't touch it until now is because I think that it's really weird, right? Because in 2000 to 2004, the country shifted towards Bush, but New Hampshire randomly flipped to John Kerry. In 2016, it narrowed up to a 2,000 vote margin, despite the fact that it really shouldn't have. And then in 2020, it just zoomed like 7.5% to the left, when the country as a whole was only 2% to the left. So really weird things happen in New Hampshire, politically at least. And I think that DeSantis would be a better fit for the southern part of the state than Trump would. But again, Republicans still did really badly here this year, and there just doesn't seem to be from my perspective, a lot of optimism from the GOP about winning New Hampshire anytime soon. So DeSantis, I put in the lean column, but he could easily lose it by more. Then for him, I think there's a state that sticks out to me as lean Republican. It's Texas. Texas in 20, I'm actually pretty proud of my Texas prediction record because in 2020, I was very much on the train of Trump doing better in Texas than a lot of people expected. Because if you watch my channel back in 2020, you'll remember a lot of people thought this was going to be down to the wire. Biden might even win Texas, right? And I was saying, no, the trends are not trending fast enough for Democrats in Dallas-Fort Worth, and they're going to lose ground in the Rio Grande Valley. And that's what happened. And I think this year, it's 2024 at least, it'll be interesting because DeSantis will do better in Dallas-Fort Worth than Trump would have done in 2024, but he'll still do worse than Trump 2020, right? Like, does that make sense? Because they're left. It's like Dallas-Fort Worth and Austin and San Antonio, those two metro areas. They're left trending, they're growing, and they're zooming towards Democrats, right? So I think 2020 Trump will do better than DeSantis in these counties, but 2024 Trump will do worse than 2024 DeSantis would do, right? Hopefully that makes some level of sense just because of trends. Either way, though, I think DeSantis would have a hard time losing Texas. We saw in the governor's race that Democrats ran Beto O'Rourke, who was supposed to be a good candidate for the southern part of the state. He still lost Zapata County, and he did better in the Rio Grande Valley than Biden did overall, but it wasn't by enough to make me think, it'll be okay for Democrats long term. The only piece of optimism that Democrats have in South Texas is that Hispanic voters tend to shift towards incumbents by pretty big margins. And so if that happens, Biden could, redeem himself in the southern part of the state, but I wouldn't count on it, especially because I think DeSantis, as we saw, did very well with Hispanic voters in his own state. And I think, the Hispanic demographic in Florida is very different than it is in Texas. But, I trust DeSantis with that kind of outreach and operation. And I don't trust Joe Biden as much because, frankly, he did not, earn that trust in 2020. And so he'll do better in Dallas. He'll do better in San Antonio. He'll do better in Austin. But it still won't be, by enough to flip Texas. Although I do think it'll narrow up by a couple of points. Lean Republican. Yeah, I think that's it for our lean Republican states. Let's talk about our lean Democratic states here. So the first is Michigan. This probably will not come as a surprise to anyone. Democrats did really well here this year. They won all three competitive House races and came really close in another race that they could have won had they actually funded their candidate. And they also, they won the governorship by 11. They won the Secretary of State race by 15. They won the Attorney General race by 9. And so when you have all those results, it kind of demoralizes, a party and the Republicans. And so the Republicans have a problem of this year they got the worst of both worlds in that their numbers with working class voters were atrocious, and they also got destroyed in the suburbs, right? And so Trump got destroyed in the suburbs, but he at least was able to put up good numbers with the working class. DeSantis, I think, in Michigan specifically is kind of between a rock and a hard place in that he would do better than Trump in the suburbs would in 2024, but A, not by enough, and B, he would lose, I think, a lot of the gains that Trump made with working class voter just because that's what we saw as kind of a down ballot effect. And so I think Biden wins Michigan by 5 either way in 2024, but against DeSantis, I think that Republicans have a higher floor but a lower ceiling, right? Like Trump could come really close to winning Michigan on a good night for him. I don't really see a scenario in which he wins, but I think he'd come really close to doing so. DeSantis, I think, could, wouldn't lose it by as much as Trump would have the ability to lose it by, but I think he wouldn't really have any chance of getting close in it either. So Michigan, to me, just is a prime example of a lean Democratic state, not really competitive, but still semi-competitive or still semi-close margins. So that's our only lean D state. Let's talk about our lean R states. So the first one that I see here, and actually this is the only one that I see, is Nevada. And so Nevada, to me, you could put in the tilt column, but I just want to be a little, aggressive here. I want to give some hot takes, right? And I think, so the 2022 turn in Nevada is interesting because most people view Nevada as a success for Democrats this year, or last year technically. And I get that because, they held on to the 3 House seats and Catherin, Cortez, Masto won re-election. But the electorate that turned out in Nevada voted for Trump by 5%. That group of voters that showed up for midterm day in 2022 voted for Trump by 5%. And so what that means is that, A, it shows Nevada's trending red. It also shows the Democrats have a less reliable turnout coalition because, again, a lot of it is non-college educated voters in Las Vegas, which are, again, less likely to turn out than, say, educated voters in the suburbs. And on top of that, Democrats ran like Republicans ran a really bad campaign operation in Nevada, Democrats ran a really good campaign operation, and they only won the federal race by a point. And so, Nevada's at this point to me undeniably a right trending state, and I think DeSantis is a really good candidate for everywhere in the state. Sun Belt. He'd do well in the suburbs of Las Vegas. I think he'd do well in the city itself for a Republican. He wouldn't win it, but I think he'd make inroads. And like if the electorate's anywhere close to Trump plus 5, like it was this midterm, I think he wins it by a point or so, maybe 2. So we'll put in the lean R column. Now the rest of these states are all toss-ups, and I think you could like realistically make the case for any of them going to any candidate. But I guess we'll just do this in geographical order here. So Pennsylvania, I think, would vote for Joe Biden. And I say that because he's from there. Democrats did really well there this year, and I understand Republicans ran a terrible candidate for governor that likely dragged down all their other candidates along with them. But at the end of the day, they still, like, Dr. Oz still lost a very winnable Senate race by 5%, right? Like, you can blame it on Doug Mastriano all you want. I think he had a big part of, the GOP collapse this year in the state. But, like, you do not lose the federal race that you were expected to win by 5%, which is a big margin, and then just go on to, like, be fine. Republicans have to make, like, serious change in Pennsylvania because they're losing ground, like, almost everywhere. And DeSantis especially, I think, just does not really resonate with the working class within Pennsylvania. In other states, I think he will, but not really in Pennsylvania. And in addition to that, when you look at, the Philadelphia suburbs, like if DeSantis were to win Pennsylvania, he'd do it through the suburbs. And the fact that the suburbs were just so like anti-Dr. Oz, despite all the hype about him, winning those areas is to me just like very, very indicative of them not going red anytime soon. I think they're going to stay blue for a while. And that's why I think Biden wins it by, I'll say 2%, but it could be even more. Now that being said, we're going to go to Wisconsin. I think we'll do that next. And I think DeSantis wins that. It's like, I understand Tony Evers won re-election. I understand I was wrong about him, but the federal race in the ballot, which is Johnson versus Barnes, voted for Ron by a point. Wisconsin's a right trending state. And I think DeSantis will do well enough with rural voters and well enough in the Wow counties to just barely eke it out. Biden could easily win Wisconsin. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. But, like, he'd have to cut, like, to win Wisconsin as a Democrat nowadays, you have to go like 3 for 3 in the major categories of like working class, rural, and wow. And I think Biden can go 1 for 3 or 2 for 3, but doing all 3 is just like not the most likely outcome. It's possible, but I just like statistically, I just don't think it's the most likely outcome. And I think as a result of that, you get a DeSantis victory in Wisconsin just by sheer probability. North Carolina is similar. Biden could do reasonably well here. I think he could certainly continue the inroads that Democrats have been making in the suburbs, especially in the Triangle. But the northern rural black areas of the state are trending red big time. Republicans still haven't maxed out their Appalachian, kind of base. And DeSantis being a Sun Belt governor from a state that's kind of close to North Carolina geographically, I think makes him a better fit for this region in general, kind of the southern, southeastern tip of the country. And I think North Carolina, he's just a better fit for it than Trump. Trump could maybe lose it. As you'll have seen in my video, I had Trump narrowly carrying it. I think I said by like half a point. I think DeSantis wins by maybe a point more, but still very close. Now, Georgia, this is where it gets interesting because I think DeSantis wins Georgia. And that's a hot take. Like, I understand that. I understand a lot of people think it's, gone for Republicans. But here's the thing. Just to look at federal races in Georgia as a whole, like, I understand Herschel Walker lost the Senate race. We'll talk about that in a second. But, like, in these House races, which, again, everyone was contested, so it's a fair analysis, Democrats lost the House popular vote by almost 5% in Georgia. And they did this, while winning the Senate race. And so, yeah, Raphael Warnock's a really good fit for the state. Herschel Walker was terrible. And I said that, and I predicted that race correctly. But I cannot ignore the fact that Republicans won the House races by 5 overall. They won the governorship by 8. And they won, the row offices like Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, by good margins as well. And so, yeah, it's a blue trending state. I think it's going to go blue in 2026 and, beyond. But I think Republicans have, kind of one last hurrah in them in the state because DeSantis, Brian Kemp was no, Phil. People that talk about Brian Kemp, he was a Phil Scott who had to appeal to Democrats to win. Brian Kemp won because he was just a generic conservative, and that's what Georgia likes. The only way to lose Georgia as a Republican is to run as, a very right-wing conservative, or not even conservative, just a very right-wing person, like Herschel Walker or Donald Trump. When you get like normal conservatives like, Brian Kemp or Raffensperger or DeSantis, Georgia seems to like them. DeSantis wouldn't win by 8 like Kemp did, but I think he wins by, a couple thousand votes. He narrowly ekes it out. Now, finally, Arizona. This is what it comes down to, Arizona. Do I think Arizona is going to vote for DeSantis or Biden? So let's talk with this from both perspectives, because I really have no idea who wins the state, in all honesty. The case for Biden is that it's a left-trending state. Mark Kelly won by 5%, and even Katie Hobbs, who was expected to lose, won by, half a point, right? The counterpoint is that Democrats did well in Arizona because Republicans ran awful candidates like Blake Masters, Carrie Lake, and Mark Fincham, all of whom were election deniers, who were very right-wing, who were too, I think conservative for the state as a whole. And when you look at the races where Republicans ran like DeSantis-type conservatives, they did well. Democrats, for example, won both the 1st and 6th districts in every race. Like, Mark Kelly won them, Katie Hobbs won them, Adrian Fontes won them. All their candidates for all those random races, like Attorney General, Secretary of State, all those row offices you hear about every year, they all carried those districts. But they did not win them in the House because Republicans had good candidates in Juan Ciscomani and David Schweiker. And so I think DeSantis is similar to Schweiker in that he's very conservative on social issues, but I don't think he goes all the way Trump does. And that's why I think he's a better fit for the state. So I think Arizona, because, I think Biden does worse with the youth vote against DeSantis than he would against Trump. And I think he does slightly worse in the suburbs. And I think Hispanic turnout is just not good enough for Democrats to win the state. Could be totally wrong with this one, but I think as of right now, I sense it tilting towards Ron DeSantis. So, that is the prediction, I guess you could say, as of right now. It's still very early. It's still January. So a lot of things are going to change. I am very confident this will not be my final prediction. But, so thanks for watching again. Go follow me on Instagram, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.